After months of waiting, the truth was finally brought to light before the eyes of justice. The name Rick Harrison, a television icon, a man once recognized as a family model and one of the brightest stars in the entertainment industry, has now become the subject of one of the most shocking cases in judicial history. The smiling performances on television can no longer hide the dark shadows lurking behind the glimmering facade. In the final trial, the judge pointed out the grave crimes that Harrison must be held accountable for. However, the punishment was not merely a criminal sentence. It marked the end of an empire, a legend, and more importantly, it served as a warning to all about the power of silence, manipulation, and the secrets that one can bury beneath a glossy exterior. If you find these stories truly thought-provoking and close to your heart, don't forget to leave a comment with number 1 if you empathize with Rick Harrison, have witnessed or resonate with this emotional journey, or number 0 if you have a different perspective. Make sure to like and share so your friends can follow along with this story too. Tonight, the entire nation holds its breath in the courtroom. His adopted daughter, with a trembling but determined voice, breaks the silence. Her words not only shake the carefully crafted reputation, but also expose one of the most terrifying secrets ever concealed behind the cameras. Welcome to this documentary, where the truth, no matter how painful, can no longer be ignored. Outside, the scorching heat of Las Vegas burns, but inside Clark County Court, the atmosphere is frigid, dense, almost suffocating. The bright white lights from the ceiling illuminate every corner of the glossy marble, casting a brilliant glow. Each step echoes like the reverberations of a trial about to unfold. The cameras of major media outlets remain silent, all focused on the same spot. Rick Harrison, dressed in a dark suit, a stark contrast to his usual image, sits at the defendant's stand, his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed forward. At a distant point, the confidence and calm that once defined him are gone. His face is a tight mask of tension. Nearby, his son, Curry, lowers his gaze, trapped in the silence, saying more than any words ever could. The jury seems indifferent, holding thick binders filled with notes, though their eyes constantly shift towards the entrance. They know the worst is yet to come. The room, packed with journalists and the public, remains still, waiting in tense anticipation. A dense silence envelops the room. Everyone is waiting for a truth that has the power to change everything. Then, the side door opens, and for the first time, the face of a young woman, until now unknown to the public, appears. She is only 24 years old, but in her eyes one can sense the weight of a life lived in silence. She is Rick Harrison's adopted daughter, someone almost no one has spoken about, her existence kept hidden from the media's attention. She wears black, her hair tied back, and no makeup. She seems to want to avoid the spotlight, but all eyes immediately turn toward her. She walked up to the stand, sitting down before the microphone, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. The judge called for silence, though no one dared make a sound. And then he spoke 5 words that tore through the air like an invisible gunshot. "They took turns with me." The whispers of the press turned into shock. Some audience members began to cry, while others simply lowered their heads, unable to bear the moment. Rick Harrison raised his hand to his face. Curry closed his eyes as if the ground were opening beneath him. Those words were more than just an accusation. They were an emotional bomb. They shattered the image of the perfect father into 2. The legend was beginning to crumble. The armor of the man whom millions had admired for years was cracking before everyone's eyes. Did you once believe Rick Harrison was a role model? No? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Your voice matters too. The silence continued to weigh heavily in the room, but the young woman didn't stop. She took a deep breath and began to tell a story no one expected to hear. It wasn't just a testimony. It was an exact recounting of a childhood filled with fear. A story that exposed the darkest corners of a home that seemed to offer love and stability. She said she was adopted at the age of 6. The media portrayed her as the lucky daughter of a picture-perfect television family. But behind the walls lined with display cabinets filled with valuable items, the reality was different from what it appeared at first. Rick oversaw every aspect of her life. He disguised it as protection, but in reality, it was absolute control. He told her that she would forever. Grateful for him, she became worthless without him. His sweet words laced with poison, "You have no one but me," and "If you speak out, everyone will hate you." Over time, those words became an emotional prison. The abuse she described wasn't immediate. It was gradual, meticulous, and painfully subtle. He wasn't the only one involved. When she tried to rebel, the punishment wasn't physical. It was silence. The threats were veiled. "Do you want to go back to foster care? No one will believe you against Rick Harrison." At school, she learned how to fake a smile. At home, in order to survive, her identity, her self-worth, her voice were shattered by the very environment that promised to protect her. But everything changed one night when, while watching an old episode of the show on her mobile phone, she heard Rick speak about the value of truth. In that moment, something inside her awakened. She decided to speak out, not for revenge, but for justice, not just for herself, but for all the invisible girls like her. That was the beginning of her liberation. And that day, in the courtroom, she was no longer a shadow. She was a witness. That was the truth, and nothing could silence it. Everything seemed to go as expected, but what happened next shook the courtroom even further. The prosecution presented new evidence, a recording saved from an old mobile phone. They played a conversation between Rick and another adult, with a tone that was clearly coercive toward a minor. Forensic experts confirmed the authenticity of the recording. Every word was a direct blow to the image Rick had carefully constructed over the years. Following that came the young woman's journals, written between the ages of 9 and 17, fragments of sketches, fragmented sentences that painted a chilling picture of her life. Each page was a stark reminder of the dark truth behind the facade of the perfect family. They spoke of a profound trauma, and clinical psychologists confirmed that everything aligned with the symptoms of prolonged child abuse. But it didn't stop there. 2 former household staff members, a maid and a private tutor, decided to break their silence. Their stories matched perfectly with the accounts of the young woman. They spoke of restricted areas in the house, the screams at night, and the systematic isolation of the adolescent. The final report was nothing short of devastating. What the young woman had shared wasn't just possible, it was verifiable. In many aspects, it was even more harrowing than what she could have expressed. This trial was not just about one man. It was a reckoning with an entire system that had enabled, covered up, and elevated him to the status of an icon. Rick Harrison was not only the face of a popular show, but also a cultural symbol, a model businessman, and a self-made success story. His narrative had been reenacted in documentaries, interviews, self-help books, and universities and corporations invited him to serve as a shining example of resilience. But while the world celebrated his sharp wit, biting humor, and apparent wisdom, behind the walls of his mansion, an entirely different story was being crafted, one that no one had dared to reveal until now. The difference is clear: a network of control, silence, and abuse. What's most disturbing isn't just the coincidence, it's a structure meticulously planned and executed with precision. Can you imagine this happening behind the scenes of one of the most popular shows in the world? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear how you experienced this revelation. As the trial unfolded, Rick Harrison's face no longer represented a family or an effort, but rather stood for control and manipulation, secrets built on reputation and silence. Television networks had benefited from his image, unaware, or perhaps willingly complicit, in the dark reality lurking beneath the surface. The executives who signed contracts with him remain silent, now denying ever noticing anything unusual. The sponsors have pulled their products, and the media image begins to crumble. But the most profound revelation of the trial is the existence of a culture of silence, a culture that teaches victims to stay quiet, believing no one will believe them. A culture that says, if he's famous, he must be good. A culture that protects idols as long as they remain profitable, even as the truth starts to seep through the cracks on social media. Society is divided. Some continue to defend Harrison, while others, filled with anger, begin to question how many other truths have been hidden under the veil of entertainment. As a result, the court becomes more than just a legal space. It symbolizes the collapse of an official narrative and the emergence of an uncomfortable truth that can no longer be denied. The prosecution ruthlessly exposed the responsibilities that had been concealed for so long. The collective responsibility of those who knew and stayed silent. How many more Rick Harrisons are out there, shielded by the glow of fame? It's time to look back at Rick Harrison, a young boy who grew up in the suburbs of Las Vegas in the 1980s, facing economic hardships, struggling with academics, and diagnosed with epilepsy at a young age. This condition limited his social development. He wasn't the typical American hero, but it was precisely this struggle that his father, Richard, would later use to craft his television persona. Oldman Harrison established a modest pawn shop in 1989, Gold and Silver Pawn Shop. Rick joined the business at a young age, showcasing his talent for spotting counterfeit money and, above all, his storytelling abilities. These captivating stories caught the attention of executives at the History Channel. After decades of hard work, with a simple concept of showcasing everyday life in his shop as a window into history, Pawn Stars was born in 2009. The show was an immediate success, airing in over 150 countries and quickly becoming one of the network's most profitable franchises. But what appeared spontaneous was actually meticulously calculated. Rick was crafted as the ideal anti-hero, sarcastic, wise, and fair, but fair in his own way. His shop transformed from a family business into a major tourist attraction. His face, printed on t-shirts, mugs, and keychains, became a symbol of American culture. Rick didn't just sell antiques. He sold confidence. He became the American dream in flesh and blood. His story became a reference point at university conferences, a token of patriotism, and he nurtured the public's trust in him. But as the trial revealed, the public history was not the whole story. While Rick taught millions how to see the hidden value in the things around them, the absolute control he wielded created an invisible prison, a secret castle built on the emotional ruins of a child who depended on him. And so we come to the core of this case, not just the downfall of a celebrity, but the collapse of an icon, of a carefully constructed narrative, maintained by an entire industry and accepted without question. The trial revealed that Rick Harrison was not just a strict man, but someone who exercised tight control. According to the testimony of his adopted daughter, his home functioned as a closed-off environment where every detail was closely monitored by him. From the furniture to the meal times, everything followed rules that were unbreakable. But where his power was most evident was in her life. She described years of manipulation under the guise of protection. Rick told her that the outside world was dangerous, and that no one would love her like he did. He told her that isolating her was for her own good. He gave her gifts and promised a bright future. But the truth was that these gifts always came with conditions. Her affection was controlled by mandatory gratitude, and love was twisted into blind loyalty. She no longer knew where her will ended and where his influence began. Every decision, from what she studied to what she wore, had to be approved by him. When she started questioning him, his gentleness disappeared, replaced by coldness and words that made her doubt herself. She began to believe that she truly didn't deserve to be loved by anyone else. The sweet words, however, were all part of an invisible chain, an emotional trap. He forbade her from having friends, using social media, or chatting without supervision. Gradually, her world shrank down to those four walls. Rick became the judge, the guide, and the executioner. But the most brutal part of all was the direct involvement of his son, Curry Harrison. Always perceived as passive, the young woman referred to him as an active accomplice. His initial words, "They take turns with me," now carried an even darker, more terrifying meaning. The prosecutor presented messages extracted from electronic devices in which Rick and Curry discussed the young woman's behavior and how to correct it. Though the terms were vague, child sexual abuse experts identified a clear pattern of dominance and complicity. Their shared control was not only physical, but also psychological and emotional. Every time the young woman showed signs of rebellion, Rick reinforced his narrative, claiming, "Without me, no one would be there for you." He painted himself as the martyr, emphasizing the sacrifices he made to prevent her from being abandoned, using her gratitude and dependency as a form of punishment. He used guilt as a tool, manipulating her emotions and using shame as a weapon. One of the most shocking moments was when she recounted how Rick gave her a locked diary, but he kept the key. He would read aloud her most private thoughts during family scenes, not as a game, but as a lesson, an act of public humiliation disguised as teaching. It was a psychological power play. Forensic psychologists analyzed the environment, describing him as narcissistic and insular. Rick was the absolute center of everything. Everyone revolved around him, even Curry, who, as it was revealed, played an active role in enabling the manipulation. Experts reacted to the disturbing blend of obedience and mimicry, noting how the young woman had been constantly molded in the image of her abuser. What was most alarming wasn't just the randomness of it, but how it was systematically designed. The revelation of these details turned the case into something much larger than a mere media scandal. It became a painful mirror, reflecting a society confused between fame and goodness, allure and innocence. Rick didn't just build an empire of antiques. He constructed a secret fortress, and each brick was made from the silent pain endured over the years. The court heard the longest testimony of the trial, as Rick Harrison's adopted daughter not only shared her story but also relived it. She spoke of her teenage years, where material needs were never lacking, but love and freedom were in short supply. Behind every photo from Disneyland, every Christmas smile, and every expensive gift, there were arbitrary rules, emotional humiliation, and punishment hidden beneath the surface. She didn't describe physical abuse in literal terms, but her voice, pauses, and glances spoke volumes. She recalled an instance when she attempted to run away at the age of 16, only for the police to bring her back. Rick knew. The manipulation of the law made the child protection system itself an even greater threat. That night, he didn't hit her. He did something worse. He ignored her for weeks. He didn't speak to her, didn't look at her. She didn't exist. She spoke with a choked voice and admitted that it hurt more than any offense. What turned his testimony into an act of courage was the way he documented everything he endured over the years. He hid audio notes, recordings, and videos in a shoebox, concealed behind fake panels in his room. He even recorded messages to his future self as a way to remind himself that she wasn't crazy, that everything she endured was real, and one day she would have the courage to speak out. One of those videos, recorded when she was 12 years old, was presented in court. In it, the girl whispers into a hidden camera, "If anyone sees this, please help me. Don't hate me for telling the truth." The room full of adults fell apart. No longer was she seen as Rick Harrison's adopted daughter. From that moment on, she was the voice. She was the survivor. She was the embodiment of the truth. The spontaneous applause from the public, only subdued by the judge's gavel, turned that moment into a historic event. It was not just the outcome of a legal process, but the birth of a new identity. She was no longer the victim silenced by fear. She was a free woman, with power and dignity restored. The case became even more shocking when a figure who had remained outside the Harrison family until that point appeared. Adam Harrison, Rick's eldest son. His absence from the show had always been viewed as a personal decision, but what was revealed in a statement read by his attorney was beyond comprehension. "I can't stay silent anymore. I've always known something was wrong. I left not because I didn't love my family, but because I couldn't continue to be a part of the lie." That message dropped like a bomb both in the courtroom and in the media. It confirmed what had been suspected, that even within the Harrison family, there were those who chose to leave, either out of intuition, rejection, or self-respect. A few days later, Joan Harrison, Rick's ex-wife, broke her silence with a video statement from a secret location. She was clearly shaken, but also determined. She admitted that although she didn't directly witness the abuse, she had noticed changes in the young girl's behavior, Rick's constant excuses. "I failed in my role as a mother. I believed the explanations because it was easier than facing the unimaginable," she stated. But it was one phrase that sent a shiver through the room. When you're inside, you don't see it as abuse. You see it as normal. With that statement, she exposed a brutal truth, the involuntary cover-up, the way manipulation can paralyze even the closest family members. Joan had also become entangled in the success story, just like everyone else at the corporate level. The consequences came swiftly. Several members of the executive team at Gold and Silver Pawn Shop resigned, including the CFO, the PR director, and even the chief legal counsel. Later, the latter admitted to having signed non-disclosure agreements under Rick's name. He now called it indefensible from an ethical standpoint. History Channel itself suspended the international distribution of Pawn Stars, froze all royalty payments, and issued a strong statement condemning all forms of abuse, pledging full cooperation with authorities. Souvenir shops in Las Vegas pulled Rick's products from their shelves. Guided tours at the shop were indefinitely postponed for safety reasons. Once regarded as a symbol of collectibles, the place had become a desolate space. Staff entered through the back door, refusing to answer questions from the press. Loyal customers reported empty display cases, lights off before closing time, and a thin atmosphere, no longer filled with the scent of history, but with the scent of decay. However, the most symbolic collapse was that of Curry Harrison, Rick's biological son. He disappeared from the public eye, leaving his apartment in Las Vegas and shutting down all his social media accounts. According to reports, Curry attempted to leave the country. The court immediately issued a monitoring order at airports and borders. The image of the young man who once smiled behind the counter had now become a symbol of the fear of facing justice. Social media, forums, and commentary shows erupted. Public opinion was divided between shock, sympathy, and outrage. The story was no longer just about one family. It had become a mirror to society, reflecting what had been hidden beneath a glamorous surface. An era that once seemed secure appeared to have come to an end. The community that once idolized the Harrison family now expressed their outrage. Former collaborators of the show began to speak out. There were non-disclosure agreements, restricted areas on set, and suspicious behavior, all of which, combined with new information, raised alarming concerns. An anonymous former producer confessed that Rick had a steel-walled office on set with no cameras. At the time, due to its limited access, it was considered a creative space. Today, this location is being investigated as a potential center for destroying evidence. The complete collapse. Not just one person, but an entire legend, a family, a brand, and even an industry that had benefited from its image for years, all came crashing down. The history of the Harrison family, once seen as a proud legacy, was shattered piece by piece. And what was most troubling was that the signs had always been there: evasive attitudes, dark areas protected by contracts, yet the show's excellence remained as it always had, stronger than any doubts. As the next phase of the trial looms, the question that resonates in everyone's minds is both clear and unsettling. What did you know and choose to ignore? Because if this case has clarified anything, it's that silence is complicit. And then the moment came, marking a before and after, when the digital heart of the Harrison empire was opened. The adopted daughter, in an act of bravery, handed over an external hard drive that she had been trying to hide for many years. It contained audio-visual evidence gathered from secret videos, audio recordings, screenshots, and folders with innocuous names like Vacation, Daily Routine, or Family Time. One of these folders, the largest one, contained over 180 videos recorded by hidden cameras in various areas of the house. There were cameras in door frames, behind mirrors, integrated into smoke detectors, and even hidden in stuffed animals in the young girl's room. The metadata confirmed that the recordings were made over a span of 9 years. What was most chilling was that many of the files had been reviewed, categorized, and edited by an account linked to Rick's personal email. The prosecution was able to decode part of the file's language, including a date code and an emotional categorization. For example, TF1214 ale meant Family Time, December 14th, Light Joy. TF211 corresponded to intervention. It was a digital structure with clinical logic. Not only was everything recorded, but the emotional behavior of the victim was also documented as though it were an experiment. In addition to this disk, the FBI also seized 4 more hard drives hidden in Rick's private office. After weeks of working with cryptographers, they were able to access them. The password was a modified version of a Bible verse, Proverbs 22:16, a symbolic detail, another attempt to disguise control under the guise of morality. Inside, they found a timeline with a detailed schedule of the young woman's activities, a list of behaviors with corresponding punishments. Records of these punishments, for example, failing to make eye contact during meals would result in 48 hours of isolation. They also found conversations between Rick and Curie. In one instance, Curie said, "I tried this variation. The soft approach didn't work. I think we should use the double-guided method." And Rick responded, "Perfect. When she feels like there's no way out, she'll understand that true love rules here." Forensic psychologists were blunt. The issue wasn't discipline, but emotional manipulation, total control, and forced emotions. A structure carefully designed, but most powerful was the coincidence between the digital files and the journal written by the young woman. One of the most shocking cases, an entry from her journal dated June 7, 2018. The content. "Today they told me I must learn to stay silent if I want to continue being part of this family." On the same day, in one of the videos, you can hear Rick saying, "Here, silence is not a punishment, it is wisdom." There was no doubt this was not just testimony, it was the truth, recorded in chronological order, precise, irrefutable. The experts in the case used a term never before heard in court: multi-sensory extraction environment. They described the level of sophistication with which the control system had been built. It was not carelessness, nor occasional violence. It was a closed system, meticulously planned, based on continuous surveillance, both physically and mentally. In his final statement, the head of the forensic team said something to the jury that made the entire room hold its breath. The most troubling thing was not the lack of evidence. The most troubling thing was that this evidence was presented by the perpetrator himself to reaffirm his power. The impact was immediate. Several jury members requested a break to express their emotions. The victim, visibly affected, was escorted out by a court psychologist. Hidden cameras, hard drives, encrypted records, and altered audio were no longer just evidence. This is a confirmation of a systematic crime built through technology, emotional language, and complicit silence. After this powerful blow, the trial entered a new phase, the phase of witnesses. The first to testify was Gloria Mendoza, the housekeeper for the family from 2013 to 2019. While her role may have seemed small, her testimony was crucial. In a worried voice, she recounted instances where the young girl was locked up for hours with no clear reason. She mentioned the silence punishments, strict rules, and areas that were off-limits. If this story makes you think, share this video with those around you. Press like and share if you believe justice must always be served. Leave your opinion in the comments section and share your thoughts on what happened in this case. What do you think of Rick Harrison's verdict? Do you think this is a deserved punishment? Especially the classroom and the East Wing. Then it was Brad Cuman's turn, the former audio-visual technician for the Pawn Stars show. His involvement was very significant. He revealed that Rick had repeatedly sought advice on covert recording systems to protect his daughter from outside influences. But what caught his attention was the level of detail in the requests. Night vision, remote storage. He even asked whether cameras should be installed in her private room. When Cummins expressed his concerns, Rick's response unsettled everything. "Under my roof, everything must be under my control." The most shocking testimony, however, did not come from a person, but from the forensic audio obtained from the seized discs. The recording, which lasted just under 3.5 minutes, was analyzed by experts in acoustics and sensitive content. Footsteps could be heard, the calm voice of Rick Harrison, and the voice of the teenage victim pleading. The full content was not made public, but a portion was approved for the jury under confidentiality conditions. The reaction was immediate. 2 jurors requested a break for health reasons. A woman in her 50s left the room in tears. The rawness of what was heard even broke through the barriers of decorum. Meanwhile, social media seized on leaked information from journalists and legal assistants, turning "the truth about the truth" into the #1 hashtag. Rick became a global trending topic within minutes. The previously divided audience now leaned fully toward outrage. In parallel, the FBI presented clips extracted from the digital storage archive. One clip showed Rick handing the young girl a handwritten set of family rules. Another clip, with unclear content, showed the minor motionless in a corner for over 2 hours. A fixed camera recorded her without interruption. It seemed like an experiment in behavior. The Attorney General used these images to argue that the abuse was not limited to physical contact, but also psychological, emotional, and technological. He stated that the real crime was making the victim believe that hell was love. Ultimately, conflicting messages began to emerge among the household staff. Some people would say things like, "Don't enter when he's in strict dad mode," or "Better not to look at that girl." These were warning signs, indirect evidence that many knew, but no one spoke about. The courtroom became the place where long-delayed truths were finally revealed. The atmosphere in the courtroom was no longer about ordinary justice, but about exposing a decayed moral structure. Each new testimony felt like another brick removed from the fortress of illusion that the Harrison family had built. And while the truth was gradually coming to light, one question remained unanswered. What had caused so many people to stay silent for so long? The testimonies, each image, each word, fit together like pieces of a horrific puzzle. Not for sensationalism, but for precise investigation. Not for revenge, but for justice. And then came one of the most anticipated yet tense moments of the trial. The day Kerr Harrison took the stand. The atmosphere in the room was electric. He wasn't just another witness. He was the biological son of the defendant, the visible face of the show, standing beside his father for years. The one who was presented as the charming young heir of the family business. But that morning, there was no script, no cameras, only the truth. Kerr entered the room, escorted by 2 federal agents. He wore a white shirt, no tie, and his sleeves were wrinkled. His face showed signs of exhaustion, and his bloodshot eyes avoided looking at the audience. His posture was rigid, almost defiant. At first, he responded with monotone syllables. He firmly denied any abuse, claiming it was all just an overinterpretation of emotions from a young woman who had suffered psychological trauma. The person, according to him, had confused discipline with harm. But it only took 30 minutes for that armor to crack. The prosecutor, with the calm demeanor of a surgeon, presented the evidence. Conversations, screenshots, chat logs, handwritten notes. Everything was relevant. Each piece of evidence weakened his defense. One of the phrases found on the hard drive was particularly disturbing. Curie knows when to intervene. She understands that it's a normal thing and is not afraid. The important thing was that she had no doubt she was special when asked about it. It meant that Curie had tried to avoid answering. He said he had never read the file, that it could have been misunderstood, but the pressure was mounting. He was handed a handwritten note found in the personal journal that had been seized a few weeks prior. It was a letter, dated January 2021. The jury listened in complete silence as the prosecutor read the letter. "Sometimes I feel like if she speaks up, everything will get worse. But sometimes I think it's fair. I can't bear the guilt anymore." "But I also can't imagine my life without this. What we did wasn't..." He was forgiven. No matter how much we try to hide it, I allowed it. And although sometimes it hurts, I even encouraged it. Curie's face contorted. Tears began to flow. He was no longer the young, smiling boy on the show, but a broken boy, caught between regret, fear of punishment, and complete exposure in front of the public. He tried to put it into words, but could only mumble, "I don't know. I don't know." The judge ordered an emergency recess. One of the jurors began breathing heavily. The emotional weight of that moment was unbearable. Some of the witnesses, family members of other victims present in solidarity, embraced each other in tears. Journalists wrote in silence, knowing they were witnessing a historic moment. When the hearing resumed, Curie's defense tried to dismiss the letter as a mere emotional outburst, not a confession in court. But it was too late. Public perception had changed forever. Social media exploded. The clip of Kerr crying spread like wildfire in minutes, with the caption, "Rick Harrison's son breaks down. I provoked it." That simple, brutal phrase sealed the complete collapse of his image. The shocked jury remained composed. Curie was escorted from the stand. No one spoke to him. No pitying glances. Just a heavy emptiness, as if the entire room realized at once that this wasn't just about Rick Harrison. The darkness didn't center on one person. It was a web, a structure. A silent poison had spread, seeping into every corner of that environment. And in that moment, what the victim had tried to explain from the start was confirmed. The abuse wasn't a single event. It was a persistent structure, an ecosystem where even those closest to the victim chose silence, until the weight became unbearable. The public collapse of Curie Harrison was not just emotional, but symbolic. It represented the downfall of a family that had long served as a media shield. The televised family business was no longer beloved. It was no longer an antique show, but a portrait of a quiet power structure, where every on-camera smile hid an unspeakable truth. And as the trial entered its final phase, the outside world began to shift. The media, fans, even critics, stopped talking about the show. They talked about the trial, the recordings, the shattered silence of a truth that, once spoken, could no longer be concealed. The global reaction was devastating. What began as a judicial scandal turned into a cultural phenomenon, a tidal wave of outrage, reflection, and symbolic revision. On social media, Hashtags like "had justice for her," # Rick Harrison, "sculpable," and #poundstars never again dominated global trends for weeks. On TikTok, thousands of users began dissecting old episodes of the show, analyzing every gesture, every comment. What once seemed humorous now sounded domineering. In one of the most viral clips, with over 40 million views, Rick was seen interrupting his son during a negotiation. A phrase once thought amusing, "The funny thing is, you're the one who decides what's valuable until I say otherwise," now sent chills down spines in light of the trial. Dozens of independent documentaries emerged on YouTube, no longer portraying Rick Harrison as a successful entrepreneur, but as a case study in media manipulation and idol building. One, titled "The Cost of Silence: The Truth Behind Pound Stars," garnered 80 million views in just 10 days and included testimonials from former fans. From former employees, forensic analysis, to psychological studies on abusive environments. The content was extensive, but the most powerful impact wasn't digital, it was human. Outside the gold and silver pawn shop, hundreds left flowers, candles, and letters addressed to the adopted daughter. A collective act of support, a silent cry for recognition. Meanwhile, other groups demanded the show's definitive cancellation. The most viral petition on change.org, "Remove Pound Stars Forever," surpassed 2 million signatures in just 72 hours. The entertainment industry was also shaken. Several production companies announced internal reviews of their protocols. The debate over the ethical boundaries of reality television was reignited, along with discussions on how fame can serve as a shield for harmful or even criminal behavior. Producers who once praised Rick now issued carefully worded statements. No more praise, only calculated silence or distance. Culturally, an unexpected phenomenon emerged: a mass rereading. From this show, the public began revisiting each episode with fresh eyes, no longer seeing humor or history. Instead, it was an unwitting record of how charisma can mask abuse. At universities in the United States, Spain, and Latin America, the trial became a case study in criminology, abuse psychology, and media workshops. Analyses dissected how an abuser could craft a narrative so powerful that even their victims questioned their own reality. Even commerce wasn't spared. T-shirts, mugs, and keychains bearing Rick's image were pulled from physical and online stores. Platforms like Amazon and eBay faced public pressure. They were forced to stop selling products tied to the Pound Stars brand. Stores in Las Vegas reported vandalism of the show's promotional figures. The collapse was no longer just symbolic. It was tangible, irreversible. At an institutional level, consequences loomed. The Nevada Child Protection Commission proposed new legislation, Alejandra's Law, a symbolic name inspired by Rick's adopted daughter. The law mandated psychological evaluations for all public figures involved in reality TV shows featuring minors. Remarkably, the law passed in record time, fueled by collective outrage and the Harrison case's impact. Society had finally stopped looking away. Even the art world responded powerfully. Poetry, songs, digital illustrations, and short films began to emerge, each a tribute, sorrowful, angry, yet hopeful. The girl once forced into silence had become a global symbol of breaking that silence, no longer obscured by antiques or stage lights. Inspired by the young girl's story, Feminist groups and victim advocacy organizations spread across social media using her image, with her consent, as a symbol of resistance. One of the most poignant projects was Amnesty International's campaign, Silencing the Voice, where an actress recounted her story in the first person, paired with real courtroom imagery. It garnered millions of views. In just 3 days, the Rick Harrison case transcended a media scandal, becoming a mirror reflecting society's reckoning. The unease stemmed from a phenomenon that forced thousands, perhaps millions, to rethink what they considered safe, normal, or respectable. Entertainment was clearly not harmless. Fame, when misused, could become a mask, and the silence of those who saw, knew, and said nothing could destroy lives. The societal and media fallout was not just punishment, but a form of reparation. For the first time, victims were not only believed, but acted upon, and this message spread widely. The culture of silence lost one of its staunchest banners. Punishment, at least this time, didn't write the final chapter. What was long seen as a television empire, an emblem of the American dream, and a testament to family success, crumbled legally, morally, and ethically. The Harrison dynasty, built on history, witty remarks, and studio lights, collapsed before the world's eyes. This time, neither Rick nor Curie could define the value of anything. They were no longer there. The stars, accused as criminals, were on trial. The image of Rick Harrison leaving the courtroom in handcuffs, head bowed, face contorted, surrounded by a crowd that once clamored for his autograph and now glared with contempt, remains etched as a symbol of an unforeseen yet inevitable end. No redemptive speech, no public statement, no legal defense could erase what was documented. The recordings, the videos, the diaries, the tears, and above all, the courageous testimony of Curie's adopted daughter, her son, and the former media heir. They vanished from the courtroom after collapsing on the witness stand. Since then, he was only seen in leaked photos, attending mandatory psychological evaluations, escorted by federal agents. His face, once a symbol of family continuity, became a reflection of collapse. He was no longer the young apprentice in the shop. He was the second face of a power system built on silence. The young woman's testimony didn't just dismantle a defense, it debunked a myth, a carefully maintained structure upheld by cameras, contracts, and complicity. And with that collapse, a simple yet devastating phrase lingered. It wasn't a family, it was a facade. Media outlets that once hailed Rick as one of television's most beloved figures began retracting their praise. Specials like Pound Stars, the story behind the myth, were pulled from airwaves. International networks halted reruns of old episodes, replacing them with documentaries analyzing his downfall from psychological, legal, and social perspectives. The idol was no longer untouchable. He now stands as living proof of what happens when media power goes unchecked. The family business, the Las Vegas shop that drew millions of tourists for over a decade, was shuttered by court order. Administrative irregularities tied to the criminal investigation were uncovered. Display cases were sealed, artifacts confiscated, and visits canceled. The sign reading "Gold and Silver Pawn Shop" was removed under tight supervision to prevent vandalism. The place that once served as the heart of one of modern entertainment's most lucrative brands ceased to exist, and with its closure, an era ended. An era that celebrated familiarity, humor, and family values, but concealed control, silence, and abuse. The end of the Harrison dynasty wasn't just the result of a trial. It was the unraveling of a media empire, one that mastered turning reality into spectacle until the truth reduced it to rubble. The ultimate irony is that a story seemingly about buying and selling antiques ended with the tale of how a truth, hidden for years, toppled an empire built not on authenticity, but on fear. In that collapse, something was revealed that even Rick himself had never imagined. The imposition of everything on himself had a price, even silence. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was completely silent. No one moved, no one breathed. Normally, everyone was waiting for Judge Malcolm Trenner, a judge with more than 3 decades of experience, known for his coolness and legal precision, to speak. But even he could not hide the emotion that was rising in his voice. He held the file in his hands for a few seconds. Then, in a deep but firm voice, he announced, "This is not only one of the most disturbing cases I have ever presided over, but certainly one of the most chilling and well-documented cases this court has ever faced. The damage done was deliberate, intentional, and sustained over many years under the guise of a model family and a globally recognized television brand, and ended with a phrase that became a headline. In the media around the world today, we are not closing a case. We are burying a myth. The myth of the perfect father of an admired businessman, a seemingly incorruptible idol. They buried him not with rage but with justice, and thus, one of the most media-driven judicial records of the century is closed." But for millions of viewers, victims and citizens of a media-driven world, the moment was more than a mere legal decision. It was the final nail in the coffin of his silence. The day Rick Harrison first walked through the gates of the federal prison in Florence, Colorado, people were no longer talking about pound stars. The nation was talking about his downfall, the deepest downfall in entertainment history in decades. There were no cameras waiting for him, no fans, just a cold, routine, bureaucratic reception. The man who had taught for years how to spot hidden value in an object now walked into his cell as the subject of the most meticulously documented abuse case in modern television history. The judge's decision was clearly preventive detention, without bail, given his high risk of flight, his accumulated financial clout, and his ability to destroy evidence. But beyond the legality, there was something even more symbolic. The man who controlled everything now had no control over anything. Rick's first weeks in prison were a slow decline. He was placed in a high-security isolation module, with a cell that was only 2 meters wide on 3 sides, constant lighting, cameras in every corner, and hourly medical checks. He was not allowed contact with other prisoners, his mail was leaked, and any outside communication had to go through the Attorney General. Rick, the perfectionist who oversaw everything from the show's presentation to the editing of each episode, no longer had power, and it was destroying him, according to leaked medical reports. A few weeks later, Rick began to show signs of mental deterioration. The feelings of loneliness and loss, combined with the harsh environment of confinement, seemed to have begun to take their toll on the man who once prided himself on his strength and power. Rick Harrison's downfall was not just the result of a trial, but the end of a television empire, a legend, and ultimately, the truth that shattered it all. At first, Stern was defiant. He asked to speak to his lawyer. He asked for better terms. He tried to bargain with the guard on his former reputation. But fame within those walls was a burden, not a privilege. The looks were no longer admiration, but judgment. Gradually, the arrogant Rick disappeared. A decomposed man emerged, paranoid and frightened. He asked to be turned off the cameras. He suspected he was being poisoned. He slept on the floor, covered in blankets, trying to hide from the invisible eye. A prison official report described his condition as a gradual deterioration towards severe depersonalization, fits of muteness, extreme paranoia, emotional disconnection. He scrawled incomprehensible sentences on the walls, one that left staff shaking. Everything of value is gone, only noise remains. He was transferred to the medical ward, where he was placed on constant psychiatric supervision, where the man who had signed autographs and signed contracts worth millions of dollars for an old coin now spent hours staring into an empty corner, not asking, not speaking, not having a presence. The need for a diagnosis is a decisive, rapid collapse of an institution, a condition that arises when individuals suddenly and completely lose the ability to make decisions. Rick, the controller, now makes no decisions. Curry, his son, never visits him again. His lawyer rarely sends reports, and the fans who once flooded his store no longer write to him. His mailbox in prison remains empty. When he is finally allowed to walk in the yard, he simply walks around, muttering things like, "I wasn't there," or "I walked alone." He didn't speak to anyone, didn't look at anyone. He was like a ghost among the gray walls. In 3 months, he lost more than 12 kilos. His face aged a decade. Some of his hair fell out. He walked with a slight limp. He didn't want to explain why he didn't answer questions. He existed only in a silent loop, and it was there, in that state, that he left his last mark. A prison doctor recorded his last coherent words. "It's strange." That sound didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't speak of redemption. He just uttered the only thing that truly defined him. The echo of his own media had disappeared. When the final verdict was announced, it was not just the end of a man, but the end of a system of power that had kept the truth hidden. Rick Harrison, a man once loved and admired by millions, now became a model for the collapse of a media empire where manipulation and secrecy were hidden under a cloak of glamour. But in the end, the silence could no longer stand. Justice was served, and the truth was finally heard. If this story has made you think, do not let the silence continue. Let your voice be heard. Take action to ensure that what happened in this case is not just a warning, but a force for change. Click like and share to raise awareness among friends and family about the importance of seeking truth and justice. Thank you, and see you in the next video.